Okay, tell me when.
You're on.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, hello everybody. One quick program note. There's no reading to go through today because I gave you a head start on doing the Arbinger Institute Leadership and Self-Deception. I want you to start reading that. For the record, next week we'll be talking about it and the week after. So we'll actually be going over that book for 2 solid weeks. Of all the books that we've assigned or optional reading, this is the one I really legitimately and genuinely want you to read. I think I've made a program note on it before, but just in case I haven't, let me be very clear. Everybody reads this book differently, and some people love it, and other people get annoyed by it, but there's something you can get out of it, I guarantee. Remember that the last chapter gets just a little bit cultish. As I've stated before, whenever you have management books that are trying to teach a particular technique or the other, that often happens. So don't let that bug you. When you get to the point where they start talking about, if you'll do seminars on this, your entire organization could benefit, you could just kind of skim that part and not particularly care anymore. But the book itself, getting out of the box, and the little voices in your head and how you rationalize decisions, actually is very strongly backed by science, and I'll go through some of that next week. So absolutely worth reading. Please get to it. In the meantime, I'd like to congratulate all of you. I think we've got 11 people here, even with the Star Wars opening. I'll take that as a sign that you're all entirely too busy for work, as was mentioned a moment ago. Let me go through and say, before I get into today's lecture, congratulations. This series was broken up into 3 things. All right, so you had the basics of management, you had pretty much team and how to get groups of people together, and the last is a little bit more strategic, and they're all more about culture. So you've made it to the last 4. Well done on still putting up with it and not going to sleep. So let's talk about it. What are some of the things that can really hit you from a culture? Well, today we're going to talk about roadblocking. We're going to talk about people accepting or being able to handle change and organizations' abilities to do the same. So I guess I should say that if we're going to talk about change and how to handle change and is change going to work out for us, any change that we're going to do, we're making an assumption here. Any change that we're trying to put forward for purposes of this conversation, we're assuming, 1, the change is good, as in you've thought through it, and 2, you're intelligent, all right? Because I've seen people walk in places and say, I'm going to change this or that or the other, and they're absolutely lunatic ideas. Or the people have, sort of the Peter principle and Dilbert principle. They probably shouldn't be in their role. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that everybody here is intelligent and you've come up with a really good change, and you're just getting into an organization, or you're just taking over a team, and you need to implement that change. And what happens? Well, we're going to talk about roadblocking. Why do some people say no? Why do teams push back? How come people don't get involved? Why aren't people excited about it? This sort of thing. General roadblocking, meaning, why do people resist change? So let's go through that. People resist change for a lot of reasons, and you could probably run out of space on every whiteboard in the world if we tried to write them all. We're going to go through the top 8, or at least the ones that I've seen most often. I think everybody in the world has a list for this, and they all disagree on what the real reasons are, but these are the ones that I've found to be most often. One is simple inertia. Simple inertia is basically when someone wants to stay in a comfort zone. It's when they say, this is how we've always done it, So when you say we're going to put this change, there's a pushback, sometimes quiet. Sometimes they won't even say out loud. They're just a little late to the meeting, not really pushing for the deadlines, they're not giving their all. They're going through the motions at best because, this was good enough for me yesterday, and I'm sure it'll be good enough for me tomorrow. Some cultures, and we mentioned this in one of the other ones, some cultures will actually become driven completely by inertia. And it's more common the larger the business and the longer it's been in business. But it can happen even at a startup. You have an initial success by doing something in a certain way. No one wants to deviate. Man, we were lucky. We were making money in less than 18 months. Just keep going with that. That's how you do it. And this inertia starts. Once it starts, it's hideously difficult to change course once that ship's going down that path. Once again, I got nautical. Yes, I know. But simple inertia is one. Another one, which should be pretty obvious, is a communication fail. This really means that you haven't explained the benefits of the change. If people are willing, it's not just a matter of inertia, and they're willing to do it, but you haven't explained it. I should probably point out, a simple communication fail can be for business or personal reasons. It hasn't been explained to you what good this would do. It hasn't been explained to the organization what the change is going to do. It hasn't been explained to the business as a whole. Why we even care, So just a lack of talking about it. That's really common. I'm not talking about communicating better. We'll get into that. I'm talking about a complete lack of a communication plan. A lot of people come in, they're really fired up, they see something, they see a better way to do it, they want to go about doing it, but they never consider how do you get the stakeholders involved? How do you get the teams on board? They just don't have a communication plan. That's why if any of you are in project management, gosh, I wish that thing would quit jumping up and down. If any of you are in project management, the Arbinger Institute, part of the plans to succeed at anything involves a communication strategy, and if you don't have one, they assume you don't actually have a successful project in the making. So a communication fail. Number 3 reasons that people will ignore risk is concern about consequences. So what are we saying? This is an unknown or known risk, right? What could happen if we do this? What could fall apart? What's going to break? What's going to this? This is really a fear of that the change itself isn't very well thought out. If people are concerned about consequences, well, if I do that, could it break that? Could it break that? Could it break that? If you thought it out, if you've given it the appropriate amount of time and effort and energy, and you've communicated it in your communication plan, this one won't come up as much, but it's always going to come up a little. So fear of consequences is something you have to keep in mind of. Here's one that's going to be interesting. Loss of an information edge. Let's talk through what that means. The irreplaceable person. I think I mentioned in one of the other ones that what one of the greatest robber barons of our time said is he went through his business every week and found an irreplaceable person and fired them. You have these roadblocks of people who hold on to a particular piece of information and don't necessarily want to share to change it because it gives them some security that they're the only person that knows how to do that. An information edge is another way of describing that. But I want to take that a little bit further, so let's spend a little bit of time on this. There are several theories of thought that basically say everything in business, everything in personal relationships, everything that makes you a success involves in one way or another something called an information inequality, which is a legitimate way of looking at the world, frankly. If you go back to earlier history, information was actually, in my opinion, every bit as critical as it is today, and it was openly known that it was, and people fought for it. Guilds and lodges were built in base that today, some of which still exist in one form or another. The Masonic Guild, the Masons Guild, these are bricklayers once upon a time. If you go down and look at how people become electricians, if you look at how they become carpenters and the rest, you have this period where they come in, they go through an apprenticeship, they wind up becoming a journeyman and eventually become a master certified, whatever the case may be. All of those guilds and those unions were really about information inequality. We know how to do this and you don't, and you have to go through this in order to also learn how to do this, and we protect our secrets. Same thing happens in business. If you think about consulting, if you think about anything, it's simply that I know more about this particular thing that you do, and I trade on my knowledge of how to do that. Our operations team, well, they know more about how to manage people. Our HR teams know more about how to hire. Those of us in HR know more about system. We understand the servers. We understand the services that write on the servers. We understand the network that the services from the servers write across. We have information inequality with the rest of the people in this company, depending on the value of the information you hold and how many people want that information, frankly, determines what you're paid, right? So information inequality is actually a very good thing. It's the basis of business, and it's why you can study and improve your life, because you're gaining more information that the average bear doesn't have in their head. It's why we have universities to this very day, and why they charge so much, because they know very well what they're giving you, unless you're taking underwater basket weaving. So go STEM. Always go STEM. So loss of an information edge, somebody who knows something because they know the way it's done today. And if you change it, they don't have that anymore. It lessens their ability to stay in their job. It lessens their ability to argue for a raise. It just lessens their ability to do whatever. And people fear that. So that is information. Next up is going to be competing priorities. So why would someone push against a change? Ostensibly for the better. Remember, our assumption is the change is good and you're pretty smart, right? So why would someone do that? Well, what else is going on at the same time? I can't possibly make this change right now. We're going into the Christmas season. We do it here. We're in the middle of a change phase because our clients say you can't mess with anytime basically from Black Friday to about January 12th to January 15th because we're risking their revenue stream. Right? So there are always competing priorities, and some of which can stop a change from going into place. So that's, frankly, probably a more legitimate one than a lot of the other ones. And it's your job to make sure to manage around that. Number 6, yes, it's the ugly word, politics. I'm going to give you an example. A dear friend of mine, somebody I know, respect, his intellect is towering. His ability to understand complex systems is just mind-boggling, and his ability to realize when he's cheesing people off, limited. All right, he's gotten better over the years, I must say, but he's got his PhD. He's very proud of himself, with reason. He's got a brain the size of a Cray supercomputer, but politics eludes him sometimes. He was at a long-haul carrier. I'm not going to say who the long-haul carrier is, but it rhymes with level 3. He had an idea for how to set up a better BI system. You can almost hear Kevin Ahern start listening. He had an idea how to set up a better BI system, and he was right. I actually reviewed his homework. Where he was going to go made perfect sense, and the tool they were using was abysmal. And it was costing them all sorts of money. I'm not sure if some of you know, if you haven't worked for one of the Bells or one of the long-haul carriers, but facilities, specifically facilities mapping, is a black hole of money. Always losing where they've got fiber, where they've got copper, what the capacity is. They have whole teams of people whose whole job is to just see if they've really got enough to carry traffic from A to B. And he had this great idea of using this other tool instead of the absolute piece of crap they had, and it would save them so much money, it would be mind-boggling, and their service levels would improve.
Don't tell me it was Google Docs.
No, but he was absolutely correct. I looked through his homework. I agreed completely. I thought it was clever, really. He had in mind this complete revamp, rip out this tool, root and branch, bring this other one in, automate all these systems, things that we're doing today, some of our automation in the background. He had this planned out. This was 20 years ago, guys. No one was thinking this sort of stuff. He was way ahead of his time. And he was doomed to fail. Doomed to fail. Because there was a senior vice president of one of the divisions that had personally put his stamp and name that the tool they had was going to bring them great success. And here's my friend who did an analysis that proved it hadn't, but this other one would. But that senior vice president had signatory approval of the budget. What do you think happened? It was absolutely in the best interest of the company. It was absolutely correct. It was a great change, and it was never going to happen and did not. In fact, just to put a period at the end of that particular sentence, the next round of layoffs, because like every telco, they're always doing layoffs in one division or another, his name, for no particular reason, wind up on that list. I hired him, I should point out, at the company that I worked for, and I treated him much better than they did. He's off right now in the pharma industry, having a lot of fun. But he actually lost his job over it. If you're not paying attention to political, remember, what are the three things we manage, people? Right? We manage people. We manage finances. We manage political capital. If you're not taking that into account for change, you're going to lose. And it would only have taken him, by the way, probably a couple of weeks of walking around and talking to various stakeholders, and he would have found out that this multi-million-dollar change was doomed from the start. He could have saved himself a lot of pain. He probably would have saved his job, and he would have saved his team from getting broken up and scattered to the wind. You owe, when producing a change, you owe the team, the company, and yourself to consider political capital as part of it. All right? So, next up, 7, lack of trust. Now, when I say lack of trust, that's in you, in the team, in the organization, or in the company. It can be a lack of trust in anything. It's basically saying you don't have the capabilities, the team doesn't have the capabilities, the company doesn't have the capability or the culture to pull it off. That's kind of a big deal, and we're going to go into a little more detail on trust a little bit later. But it could be that you do have the capability. Remember, we were making the assumption that, 1, the change is good, and 2, you're pretty smart. So let's assume for the case, at least in this case, that this lack of trust has no basis. It's just, again, probably communication, right? Finally, because I told you I was only going to do 8, and this is the beast, the fear of punitive actions. What some people call a culture of fear or a punitive culture. I usually call it a punitive culture because otherwise it just sounds too much like a bad science fiction show. Punitive actions or a punitive culture. I think you know what that means. We're going to make sure. Fear of fallout. I think that if you were to take these first 7, all of those can be dealt with. Remember the assumptions. It's a good idea and you're smart. All of those can be dealt with better communication. All of these. I mean, you can go through people and say, I know this is how it's always been done this way, but if I do that, let me show you the value add. Communication plan in general, you should have that. Oh my God, please. But if you talk about the fear of consequences, well, did you have a backup plan? Do you have a fallback plan? I mean, how many times have I said here since, what have I been here, 2.5 years now? How many times have I said if you don't have a plan B, you don't have a plan A? You've always got to have a fallback. Loss of an information edge. I know this is going to be new. I know you don't know how to do this, but I'm going to set up training, competing priorities. I know this is tough because of Christmas, but I have this backup just in case, and we'll always prioritize that. Don't worry about it. Politics. I already talked to Eddie. I already went to Chad's office. I already sat down and talked to Jay, whatever the case may be. Lack of trust in capabilities. It doesn't seem like something that we've done before, but we did do a similar project, I understand, and we still got the learnings from that. I mean, you can pretty much communicate your way, assuming you've done your homework. And again, that comes part of I'm assuming you're smart and it's a good idea. Assuming you've done your homework, all of those can be handled except for the punitive culture. Now, if you find out that you've got a punitive culture, you have a bigger problem, which is if you don't make a culture shift, you're not going to succeed. It doesn't matter. The idea could be amazing. You're done. Without dealing with that, you've got no chance. So let's talk quickly, because remember, this is all about long-term thinking, right? If you come upon a situation where you've got to change, but it can't happen because the culture is kind of punitive, What do? Well, first off, you got to be able to recognize what a punitive culture is. Culture, not person, not manager, not guy in your team, culture. Let's talk through top 5 signs of how you know you've got a punitive culture. 1, rewards only on outcome. That sounds like it wouldn't be a bad thing at first glance, but it is. You know, if somebody gets promoted, or someone gets a raise, or someone gets, I don't know, the corner office, whatever is cool at whatever company you happen to be at the time, only because they closed the deal, not because of their culture, not because of the fact that they're honest, they're good people, because they treat others well, because they're good managers, good leaders. All the things we talk about here, you know, doing right, having empathy, all of these cultural things matter. And if you have a company that only promotes based off a particular set of performance statistics, that they don't take into account the culture, the morale, the fit of the teams, how everybody likes to work together, what you get instantly is a team that you have now trained to do anything to hit that. And if that means screwing over a comrade, a competitor, or a teammate, you will, because that's the culture. That's a problem. You can't only promote on outcome. It has to be on a more balanced set of measures. It can't only be because I signed the deal. But that's one clue. Number 2, another clue that you've got it is defensive strategies. So what are defensive strategies? Defensive strategies are pre-meetings. If you notice that in the company that you've just joined or the team you've taken over, people have pre-meetings before they have meetings, that's a clue. Another one would be the email CYAs. John, just to be sure we're clear, we're doing this and this and this, and you're taking care of that. Those are natural things. When they become a concern is when they're constant. If your email inbox is full of people covering their keisters every single day, and people get together to talk before they go to the meeting with their boss, that's normal, but it shouldn't happen every single day. If every major meeting is filled with pre-meetings beforehand, you've got the signs of a very punitive culture. You have to be careful. Those are things people do out of fear. Those things don't help your day. Every now and then you have to do it to document a consequence. Every now and then you want to be sure you've got all the T's crossed and the I's dotted before you meet with Chad. That's true. But if it's constant, you have a culture of fear. We can't have that. Some people call an unhealthy culture, I'm going to say, unhealthy outbursts. What am I talking about here? Finger pointing, people yelling at other people, your boss coming out of the room yelling at somebody in public in front of other people, demonstrative outbursts of negative energy and emotion. It's a pretty good sign that you walked into a place where people get stepped on for making a mistake. Punitive cultures. I don't know of anything that will destroy teamwork faster. Not even a bad apple will destroy teamwork faster than a culture of fear. If people are afraid to strive, it's the old routine, right? If you haven't made a mistake, you haven't really tried at anything in your life. But if you're killed immediately from mistakes, people are too afraid. They spend so much of their time covering their butts that they never actually accomplish anything. So that's a pretty good one. Number 4, poor communication in general. Now, I'm not talking about having a communication plan. I'm talking about the quiet mouse strategy, which if you haven't heard the quiet mouse strategy, you haven't had fun. It happens at really large companies, especially in a division where you frankly have a real jerk for a boss. And this is where people just keep your head down. Shh, keep your head down. Don't say anything. Just do your job. Do enough that you don't get fired. Because if you raise your hand, they're going to step on you. The quiet mouse strategy. People don't talk because as long as they don't say anything, they can't get in trouble for saying something wrong. Think that through. Probably most of you at one time or another have been at a place like that, whether you realized it or not. Or you've seen another group in your company, because interestingly enough, this kind of a thing can happen in individual teams. Just like the opposite can sometimes happen in a greater culture of negativity. You can have, I think Art Burt and I used to call them little, little pools of reality, little pools of sanity, little areas of sanity. We used to talk about that at a previous company we worked at. You can have a good team that trusts itself in a larger company that can't. But it really requires a larger company that can to have sustained success. But anyway, that's number 4. Number 5, and this is company-wide, lack of clarity in assignments. This is the leadership equivalent of the quiet mouse strategy. This is a boss doing the same thing. So they say, Eddie, you know all the steps to do this, so I need you to go do the thing, and you know what I want. Well, he didn't tell you what he wanted, did he? That's so that if something goes wrong, he can't hold up this thing and say, but you told me to do that. No, it's, you knew what I wanted. I told you, you knew. So when bosses start giving a lack of clarity in assignment, I'm not talking about the opposite of micromanaging. I'm not talking about, give me an objective, not a task. No, I'm talking about when someone intentionally leaves out something that's important so that if you fail, they can point to that and say, that's where you blew it and you're fired. All right? This is a good sign of a bad boss. You'll see it every now and then, and it sucks. So these are basic clues that you're going to run into problems. I guess I should probably make the point that punitive cultures aren't created on purpose. It's not like anybody ever sat up and said, I'm going to kick everybody's keister who so much as blinks. You can have a bad boss, but I'm talking about culture. We're talking about something larger. We're talking about how a greater organization functions. You get here by accident. You get here by not managing, by not actively creating a culture of trust. And there's a couple of things, by the way, that you can watch for in yourself and you can watch for in your direct reports to make sure it doesn't happen. Let me briefly go over what that would be. So we'll get to culture trust in a moment, but let's talk through 2 or 3 things. Actually, I don't even think I need to write this, to be honest with you. Over-controlling the day. I've seen that in managers. Over-controlling the day. Eddie, I want you to work at this now, then I want you to work on that. Janet, I want you to work on this. I'm not talking about you setting your priorities and doing your number 1 things first in the day. That's okay, but that's you setting your priorities. I'm talking about where a manager comes on and says, you do this and you do that and you do this. Man, they got too much time on their hands. You start seeing over-controlling behavior on basic workloads, you've got a boss who's missing the point. They really are. Likewise, micromanaging on tasks. You're going to do this. First, I want you to talk to him, then I want you to talk to her, then I want you to call her, then I want you to send a letter to him, then I want you to do this, then I want you to... This over-controlling behavior, either on tasks or how they accomplish their workload, is it's a precursor, because the more things you give that someone can trip over, the more opportunities you have to say, but didn't I tell you that you should have done? You're setting up areas for them to fail. And you have to watch. You really do need to watch that people on your team aren't doing this. You will find out that someone who works for you has created a punitive culture about the time they all quit. Rarely will you find out in time to do anything about it. This important on you to stay engaged, stay involved, to make sure that these things don't happen, because the truth of the matter is once it happens, it's too late. Another thing that you can sometimes look for is the lack of delegation. We talked earlier about delegation, how to delegate, why it's important, right? If you see somebody that never delegates anybody important and they work for you, and anything important they keep in their hand, you need to get involved. You need to get involved, because I guarantee you their team is feeling belittled. The team is feeling like they aren't important. So I'm controlling your day. I'm micromanaging your workload. I'm not giving you anything important. Now all you've got is pitiful little things, and I've given you 100 hoops to jump through. You're going to fail something because life intrudes on plans. You're going to fail something. Someone's going to trip, and then that boss is going to come down on them. You've created a punitive culture like that very fast. You have to actively work, not to create that culture. And you do that, let's go to the opposite now, by creating a culture of trust. I bet there's 1,000 books on Amazon you can read on creating a culture of trust. It's not going to work the same for everybody. Your mileage may vary. Ask your doctor if trust is right for you. But here's how I kind of look at it. If I'm going to create a culture where my people feel like they can work together, then it starts here. It starts with you. You are the first part. One, walk the walk. And this is a matter of focus. The fastest way you can lose trust is by having your team think you only care about you. End of report. You could put a period there. I could shut this down. I could walk out, and you've already gotten your money's worth. If your team thinks you only care about you, you are done. If your team thinks you only care about your team, okay, now hear this, or your organization, you're probably going to fail because the rest of the company isn't going to trust you. You've got to have a focus that is strategic. You got to focus on the needs of your operations partners. You got to focus on the needs of your clients. You've got to focus on what's important for the company as a whole. You have to openly do it. That's why I say walk the walk. How many times do you hear us talk on our team meetings? Hey, we got to take care of our operations partners. We have to make sure Bridgestone is happy. We don't talk about IT. You can't. Anytime you're not focusing strategically, you're focusing on something smaller, you're losing trust. They need to know that any decision you make or any action you take is in the best interest of the company as a whole, in the best interest of the team as a whole, in the best interest of all of us. That's how you start to create a culture of trust. 2, be collaborative, but explain. Why do I say but explain? Because leadership isn't a team sport. Teamwork is important, but there's only one boss. You do need to be collaborative. You do need to bring in your teams to talk about things. But at the end of the day, you're going to make the decisions. We talk about servant leadership. That's making decisions on behalf of the greatest good, on behalf of the organization as a whole. It doesn't mean shared decisions. It doesn't mean I'm bringing everybody in and we're all going to vote. That's not how this works. That's my name on the door. And if it goes wrong, guess what? They're walking me out. It's kind of important that the decisions are exactly what they need to be and that I can support them wholly. Sometimes I'm going to go to my team and say, guys, we need to make a decision. I'm going to be collaborative. But I absolutely reserve the right to say no. I have to. You have to. That's part of being a leader. Your name is on there. You don't get to go to your boss later and say, well, we as a team decided this, so I guess we're all kind of sharing the blame, right? No, they're going to walk you out the door. So own your decisions, right or wrong, good or bad. Own your decisions. So be collaborative, but explain. What do I mean about by explaining? If you're not going to go with what the team says, tell them why. That's really all it means. It's very, very simple. When I talk to Art or Jamie, both my Jamie, or I talk to Kevin and we're talking about budgets, sometimes I have to spend it on this, sometimes I have to spend it on that. Sometimes I have to say no. Sometimes I can say maybe later, but I try to give context on why. I try. Not always allowed to. When I first joined, there were several decisions made for me. No context was given to me. I had to pass them down to the organization with no context. I don't think there was anybody happy about that. You guys weren't. I know I wasn't. I mean, nobody was. Since then, we've set our own organization, we've set up our own team, our own ways of communicating. It doesn't happen as often. It can happen every now and then. Life intrudes. But it doesn't happen often, and that's what matters. Okay? So, number 3. Remember, we're still trying to create a thing of trust here. Be transparent. Context. Context matters. How do I explain this to you? Context matters to your team more than it does to you. All right, so let's step back for a second. Let's unpack what that means. The higher up you sit on a ladder, the longer your view, right? And then it's also true in a corporation. I know the budget. I know operations budget. I know who they're going to hire next year. I know where we're going to grow next year, what we plan to. I know 2 or 3 deals that could change everything that we do. But there's less than 10, 15% chance they're going to happen. I'm not going to burden people with them. I'm not going to discuss them. And there's other things that I can't discuss because of the SEC, because I know this is going on, this is going on, or this is going on. The guys that work directly for me know what our budget is going to be, where we're going to plan, what we're going to do, and a couple of high-level possibilities they need to plan for. Underneath them, the managers under there know that this and this and that. Each time up or down, your viewpoint changes. Doesn't mean you're more right. Doesn't mean you're more wrong. Doesn't mean that you see better, therefore you're omnipotent and know exactly what to do every time. It's just contact, right? But the higher up you go, the less important it is for people to explain context because you can see it all. The further down in the organization you go, the more important the explanation is. So if I'm talking to somebody and I'm telling them no, or yes, or that's interesting, let's talk about it, I try to put it in terms of context. Well, our plan is to do this. Well, we're still looking at San Antonio, possibly for a long term, but we may take that back. I mean, I'm going to give that context to my team, to the people who report to me. You need to do it. The less you can see in your position, the more important that explanation is. Make sense? All right. Let's move over here. Number 4, remember, we're still building a thing of trust. Be strategic. This sounds pretty similar to number 1, but it isn't. What I'm really talking about here is don't discuss short-term plans. Talk long-term plans. When you're talking to this team about the things they need, and now we're talking about systems. If Peter Moody needs something to help him manage the spam that's coming into the servers, if I can find the money for it, I'm going to tell Jamie, I'm going to make sure he knows that I feel that this is important long-term in the interest of the company. I'm not going to do anything for tomorrow. I won't ever. It's going to change at each level, but the point of view is when you're talking to your team, talk long-term. Go ahead and say it. I don't have the budget in this, but I'll have it next year. I'll make sure it goes in. That's not a good answer sometimes. People are frustrated because they got to deal with something today, but I will get to it next year. Talk long-term. Don't just say no. Talk long-term. Maybe next year, and mean it. Be sincere. All right. Number 5, this is where I get to have fun. Accept failure. How many times have you guys heard me say everybody can make a mistake? Once. Don't make the same mistake twice is all I care about. You'd be surprised how many people don't accept failure. How many people scream. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they got to go to their boss. If one of you guys breaks something, I got to go to Chad. I got to talk to Pete. It's not a lot of fun for me, but I'll take it as long as we haven't made this mistake before. If we made the mistake before, that's a little different. I'm not real prone to accept that. But I've got to accept that some things will fail. If they didn't, I wouldn't have a job. None of us would. So you've got to be willing to accept failure graciously. I will say there is an exception, though, to this. And somebody called this, I think one upon a time they called it the company killer or the nuke. Your terminology may vary. If somebody's made a mistake so horrific that it could wreck the company, no, you can't accept failure. We used to call it breaking the stupid rule. I don't know if they still use the phrase today. Guy at a previous company, and let's be fair, I'm not going to say the name of the company, and I won't even say who it rhymes with, by the way. But a guy at a previous company pressed the button. Now, he broke the stupid rule. He had to go past 3 safeguards to press the button, and he took down the Philippines for a publicly traded company. I want to emphasize that again. I want you to hear me when I say this. He took down the Philippines when he pressed the button. But he had to go into a system and say, yes, I want to make the change even though it's stupid. He had to go over to another section and said, Yes, I want to do it in working hours. And the pop-up came up that said, are you sure this requires VP approval? He said, yes. And then he went to the last one and said, push this change in the middle of the day. It's going to affect everything because I think I know what I'm doing. And it said, are you sure? YN? He said, yes. Every safeguard that was put in place to not let this happen, he disabled, deleted, or went around and pressed the button, and he took down the Philippines. I think he might have been a little surprised how quickly he got walked out of the building. He shouldn't have been. So there is an exception to accepting failure, and it's the stupid rule, the company killer, the nuke, the career limiting move, whatever you want to call it, except failures within reasonable bounds. Taking down the Philippines was outside the bounds. All right, number 6, teach. If reprimanding. Teach. If you haven't noticed, by the way, this is a recurring theme with me. Teach. If somebody failed, if something didn't work right, are you really just going to yell? Are you really going to scream? Congratulations, you've created a punitive culture. No, you can say that was completely inappropriate. It never happens again. Are we clear? Here is what I am setting up to help you in the future. Here is the training class. Here is the tool. Here is the new process. You don't just leave them there to give them a chance to trip again. You could, but that makes you a jerk. It makes you a lousy boss. And congratulations, I hope you enjoy your punitive culture and the utter death of teamwork you create. Give them the tools so they don't make the mistake again, if at all humanly possible. If you can't give them a tool, give them a process, give them a person, give them an assistant. Do what you got to do. Have a monthly meeting. But if it's really important enough for you to yell at them, it's important enough for you to give them a tool. All right. 7, we're getting close to the end. This one upsets people. I don't care. Your job is to be concerned for the organization as a whole. You are a leader. Your job is not to care for each individual. You can if you can. You should if you can. It's a good thing if you can. It's a mitzvah. But your job as a leader is to take care of the organization, because that takes care of all of the people, not just one. Bad apples. Manage them up, manage them out. You're the boss. You need to make these decisions sometime. If you've given them the requisite amount of chances, you've got to remove them. If you're going to create a culture of trust, the people in your organization need to know that everybody else that's in their organization is going to carry their load. That they don't have that one person that's going to let them down when it hits the fan. You owe it to your team to give them people they can count on. And if you're too reticent, I was going to say something else that started with chicken, but probably not appropriate. If you're too afraid of making a move, that you don't remove somebody who wrecks every single thing they touch, you're not really doing that some person a favor so much as you're hurting everybody else in your organization. They deserve to have people they can count on. You owe it to them. Get rid of your bad apples. Manage them up if you can. For karma, nothing else. But if you can't manage them up, manage them out. Stop hurting your team. They can't trust you or each other if there's somebody not worthy of trust in their midst. You are the leader. Fix it. Okay? I do want to mention, though, the key here is quietly. If I'm going to let somebody leave, I've managed them up or I've managed them out, I don't always fire them. I just make it plain that perhaps a better thing is better for them. I'm not going to do it out loud. You'll never hear me walking up and down the hall yelling at somebody, I'm going to send you out of here packing, homeboy. It'll never come out of my mouth. The key to removing a bad apple is quietly. It should just seem to have happened on its own. Without drama, without yelling. It shouldn't be a painful thing. Now, person directly underneath you may know, but the organization as a whole better not. So, again, when you're removing, modicum of discretion, please. Last but not least, 8, understand that the speed of trust is critical. What does that mean? We talked about it a couple of times. God knows there's a few books out there. The speed of trust. Trust is the speed of trust And it starts with you. You're not trying to create an organization that everybody trusts each other from some remote location or from some remote island. It actually begins with you. Some of you have probably heard me use a couple of the following phrases before. Look, guys, I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. I just need this thing done. Hey, you guys are all smarter than me. Just find a way to do this. What's the speed of trust? I'm telling somebody that something is critical, absolutely critical, needs to be done within the next couple of weeks, needs to be done right away. If we don't get this done by the end of January, we're in trouble. I'll be that open about it too. This is absolutely critical. We're in deep trouble if we don't get this done. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Here's what I want done. You figure out how. I trust you. It has to start there. If you can't trust your team and you can't demonstrate that trust, they're not going to trust you. And then they're not going to trust the organization. That's really scary. This is probably the toughest thing you'll ever deal with. You have to be able to trust your organization. I should state, for the record, this makes it more important, much more important, that you don't have bad apples in your organization, that you don't have people who can't be trusted. You're going to put your career on the line. You have to. It's the only way your team is going to work well. You have to put your livelihood up for grabs. I'm going to trust that these guys do it. If they don't do it, it could cost me my job. But the fact of the matter is I have to give them that level of trust for them to perform well. And just like cars drafting on a highway or in the middle of a NASCAR race, this car goes faster because this car is behind it, because it's cutting the rear drag on the car. This car goes faster because it's in this slipstream. The overhead wind is actually blocked from it. Two cars operating at the speed of trust in the middle of a racetrack run faster than either one of them can alone. In today's world, in today's business environment, if you're not capable of working with that level of trust and that level of speed, chances are your team is never going to become a top performer and your personal career is never going to take off. You have to have the speed of trust, and it has to start with you. So a culture of trust starts with you trusting your team and demonstrating it consistently. All right, that's the end of it for today. As I said, I want you guys reading Leadership and Self-Deception. This is probably the most important book that I'll have you read. I'm not saying it's the most important book out there, just the most important one I'll push on you. I can tell you this. I became a better husband. I became a better father because I constantly pay attention to my own self-rationalizations. I'm not saying I'm great. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I'm all that in a bag of potato chips. I can tell you I was worse. Before that book had a real impact. Pay attention to it. And I'm looking forward to a lot of questions on that book. And I'm looking forward to a lot of conversation on that book. Now, does anybody have any questions, or do I let you leave with about 10 minutes left? Any questions at all? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. All right. Holiday schedules are coming up. Some of our classes may be canceled or delayed depending upon how things work. We will get to them all, even if we have to move them off. Yes, Kevin, may the force be with you. I love these things. And everybody, great Friday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much.